there's a few things we want to discuss, and I'm just going to share just a little bit, and then we'll open it up for questions. So appreciate everybody being on. All righty. First off, one moment. I hope everybody's doing great. We had such a, I thought, a fabulous COSA conference. All of that was really, really great. And we are very much, let's see here, appreciative of Dr. Deering and all of the work that was done in preparation for that. So fantastic work. Well, we're going to go ahead and share some good news, and that is coming from child nutrition. So I'm going to turn it over, if I can, right now to Jennifer Weber to share a little bit of updated news that we just received today from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So Jennifer, go ahead, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Superintendent. We did receive, probably a little over an hour ago, a nationwide waiver that USDA issued extending our area eligibility state waiver and all state waivers for any state that wanted one. I think every state did one, but we did get that extended to August 31st. So good news for those of you who are still serving SSO and SFSP and your site does not meet the 50% area eligibility, you may continue serving through August 31st. There were a few other extensions. Would you like me to talk about those now too?
Yep, please. Yep.
Okay, on Monday night, we received a few additional extensions. Also, the meal pattern flexibility extension was granted through July 31st, and several of the monitoring nationwide waivers were extended to August 31st. So they continue to grant the flexibility needed at this time to continue to serve the meals to the students.
All right. Very good. Thank you for that news. And if anybody's got any questions, we can answer anything specific, put that in the chat. So as of today, just want you to know that the the Oklahoma State Department of Health reports 7,480 positive cases of COVID. There's been 355 deaths at this time, and 150 currently are hospitalized. We also know that these numbers are showing a steady, if modest, increase since the reopening of the economy. Since June 1, cases have risen by nearly 1,100 and deaths by 24. Hospitalizations, however, have remained stable. So while many people are returning to more of their normal routine, health experts do urge that we all stay vigilant, engage in courteous behavior that protects others and respects those social distancing guidelines that we've all become accustomed to. So as you know, last Wednesday actually, we released the Return to Learn framework for reopening schools, which we've discussed with you in previous calls. I do hope that you've had a chance to read through it and look at how it's organized, beginning then to, or not just beginning. I know some of you have been developing your own plans prior to that, but looking at that also in lieu of, or in concert with those plans that you're already making, and just using it as a checkpoint for anything that might need to still be considered. For those of you who are working on your plans, let us know if there's anything we can do to assist. We want to be able to assist, help find answers as you come across questions or things that you want to work on. Today, I will highlight a few items in the framework, and then we will be happy to take your questions. The framework addresses 4 broad areas, if you haven't had a chance to look at that, as you consider building your own reopening plans. And they include 1, school operations, 2, academics and growth, 3, whole child and family supports, and 4, school personnel. Also, if you didn't notice it, but the table of contents is hyperlinked, so you can just touch on that table of content area of interest, and it will jump straight into the text for where that is. I hope that's a useful tool, plus the checklist at the end of that. So school operations section may be of particular interest since it includes considerations for screening and addressing possible cases of COVID-19 in your school. So related to that, we would suggest that all schools undertake some measure of screening before allowing individuals to access the building. By screening, we do not mean testing for the virus or the presence of antibodies. By screening, we actually are only referring to a simple questionnaire of symptoms or temperature checks before individuals are allowed access. And if districts choose to do screening, they should adopt a policy outlining how screening will be conducted and communicate that policy to students and families after adoption. We encourage you to plan for additional time this will take during drop-off or getting on a bus, however you plan to do that. Some will include, as I mentioned, bus stops, or districts could require families to complete some kind of certification before sending their kids to school, where we just get them used to that temperature check as a safeguard, although we know not everyone with COVID has a temperature. But our state epidemiologist did say that that temperature of 100 is the cutoff point where we would ask that that family turn back and not bring their child in with a temperature of 100, which is actually a higher threshold than the CDC, which said 100.4. So planning for a positive case, let's talk about that. And I know you're going to probably have lots of questions. In the recovery framework, we've tried to provide as much detail as it's feasible at this point of planning for cases. We've broken this down into 3 scenarios. The first is if someone begins exhibiting symptoms during the school day. That individual should be immediately isolated, sent home, and encouraged to be tested. An individual exhibiting symptoms may not return until 10 days after symptoms began and after being free of a fever for 3 days. This is an isolation period, and the time, and we refer to that isolation period as the time it takes to shed the virus, and that is approximately 10 days after symptoms begin. Alternatively, if the individual does test negative for COVID-19, normal school protocols for individuals who are ill should be followed. Second, if someone has known close contact with an individual who tested positive, namely an individual with whom they live or spend a lot of time, this individual should stay home and monitor themselves for symptoms for 14 days. This is the quarantine period. So there's a distinction there. The average amount of time it takes for an infected individual to begin to show symptoms is going to be within that quarantine period. Alternatively, if they test negative for COVID-19, normal school protocols for individuals who are ill should be followed. And then finally, if an individual tests positive for the virus and is at school, that person should be, again, isolated immediately and sent home. This is an isolation period, and that person may not return for 10 days after the symptom began and 3 days, of course, fever-free. So in this scenario, or any other scenario where a positive test occurs in the school community, schools should immediately contact their health department. And we are working to have more uniform response from health departments to school. That is something that we're finding is not uniform, and we want to work on that. That communication is something that we can get, I think, ironed out over these summer months. You can do that, or you can also call the state health department's on-call epidemiologist. Close areas where the individual spent more than 30 minutes, when you have someone, again, as I described, that has tested positive and is at school, of course, call the health department, and then close areas where the individual spent more than 30 minutes, and wait at least 24 hours before entering the area to clean. Whether or not the school or portions of the school will need to be closed will be a case-specific determination in coordination with health officials. And then finally, contact tracing will be critical in making this determination. So districts should be prepared to work with health officials to assist with contact tracing. It is important to remember that our health agencies have not previously dealt with possible cases in schools, since schools have largely been closed since the pandemic began. I urge you to stay in contact with your offices and with ours as well as you deal with potential cases, so that we may help facilitate the response and refine and improve protocols for the future. So loop us in when this occurs, and I think we can smooth communication even more swiftly. Now, as we have advised in the past, the reopening framework includes a number of considerations for various scenarios for continuous learning. And these may include traditional, distance learning, and blended learning. I want to mention a few things about those. That traditional learning, of course, districts should plan for the majority of the school year to be on site, as long as public health officials deem it safe to do so, and the school is prepared with appropriate health and safety measures. But also distance learning, and that should be something that districts should have a plan to offer distance learning, which can include online with required student participation. This learning plan should be deployed in an emergency, such as a resurgence of COVID or another circumstance in which students cannot receive on-site instruction in the building. And then blended learning. Districts may choose to offer educational services through a blended model that utilizes both distance learning and on-site learning for at least a portion of the 2020-21 school year. A blended model may better accommodate social distancing by partially reopening school buildings to provide educational services. And districts should plan for integration of school-wide virtual learning days, in addition to planning to serve portions of the student population virtually. So in anticipation, districts must consider and ensure that policies are in place when you decide to do this, or under what circumstances those virtual days will be implemented. The policies should include notifying all staff and students in advance of implementing a virtual day, and how and when students will be expected to participate, including consequences for failure to do so. More details are included in the Return to Learn Oklahoma framework, and there is also a series of distance learning videos on this topic on our OSDE YouTube page. I would encourage you to check this out, and then we will also answer questions as you have them related to that. Then I want to kind of turn your attention, if you will, to the elements of support that we're going to be providing in the department with some of our ESSER funds, CARES Act funds, and other resources that we have. So we are excited to share firmed up and concrete news that this week we will be able to give information for 2 initiatives that will be funded by OSDE's CARES Act set-aside funds. We've given a little bit of information in the guidance or framework, but I want to go into this a little further. Exact Path by Edmentum is a tool that will be offered through a statewide license purchased by the State Department of Education. It will be made available to all districts, and it's for students K through 12, and it is free. From the month of June, currently 2020, until the end of next year's school year, June 30th, 2021. This tool is used to set and achieve academic growth goals for all K through 12 students beginning this summer. And Exact Path combines adaptive diagnostics with individualized instruction and learning pathways to promote growth in math, reading language arts. So I also want you to know that it is not exclusively an online tool to use outside of the school building. It's actually something designed for inside the classroom. And it works really well in rotations, particularly in elementary classrooms, but it also can be used with gifted and talented students that want to work ahead, or those who have severe gaps in learning that have been accentuated because of the loss of face-to-face time with their teachers. It provides virtual differentiated grouping as well for teachers and meaningful reports, and it's quite intuitive. Included in that free offering, there will be training for teachers, and we know that this could be a significant part of your portfolio of offerings for students, but particularly at a time where we want to individualize learning and close gaps as rapidly as possible. We believe it'll be a meaningful tool. It does include as well the lexiles and quantiles that we are accustomed to seeing with our state assessments and those reports that come back. So it does measure that, and you'll be able to see that with growth. It is also, there will be links with existing districts that have the tools NWEA MAP, growth assessments, or Renaissance STAR assessments. And you would be able to integrate those, combining Exact Path with the information that you already have on your students as you chart a course for them individually on individualized plans. Exact Path will be available, again, as I said, for free to any student enrolled in a district that opts into the program. We'll anticipate information for districts to opt into the program this week. So I look forward to getting that off the ground, and we are excited about what can happen if we can get started just as soon as possible. So second, this week, the incentive grant application will be released through the GMS system. Districts that express their interest to apply on the CARES Act formula grant application will receive a notification once the application is available. We are going to work hard to have those grant awards made by July 1. So districts will have as much time as possible to plan for them and spend down those funds. However, in order to do this, the application turnaround will be much quicker than normal. Districts will have only 10 days to complete the application with an expected deadline of June the 22nd. So a few clarifications to make for you. Of the 5 priority areas, we have revised the priority around LMS and CMS purchases. These do not need to be from a statewide contract. The grant can be used to purchase a new system or additional services to an existing system. Of the 30% required to be used by the LEA formula allocation, no less than 10% can be spent on on any of the one areas. For example, 20% for connectivity and 10% for mental health, or any combination, 15 by 15, whatever combination to total that 30%, but it can't be less than 10% in one area. The grant funds may not be used for personnel expenses. Additionally, the 30% set aside may only be used for new personnel or stipends related to the 2 priority areas chosen by the district. More information on each of these items and additional details, including the total amount available for grants, will be released in the next day or 2. Next, I want to mention that we are entering into contract negotiations for the hotspots that we talked about. So that is moving forward. and this is the final thing I'll mention, provided those negotiations go ahead, OSDE intends to use funds from our SEA set aside to purchase 50,000 hotspots, and we will pay upfront for the cost for those hotspots. Districts will be responsible for the service cost, which is roughly 1/4 of the normal cost for a minimum of 6 months, but it can extend beyond that. Additionally, we expect the districts who are not able to receive a grant from the pool of the 50,000 to be able to access the same contract for purchase of the devices and service costs at the significantly discounted rate that we are engaging in. And then finally, Eric Friend, who is the Executive Director of Data and Information Services on our team, has another opportunity to share regarding data integration for Google Classroom. So let me shift to Eric. After Eric, we're going to open it all up for questions and see what we can do to help better explain some of the things we've tossed out. Eric?
Thank you, Superintendent. I apologize for the lighting behind me. So we have been working with Google and student information system vendors across the districts used across the state to provide a new service to integrate the data, like Superintendent said, that administrative staff put into the student information systems and the data that teachers and students put into Google Classroom. And that service would use the student data, enrollment data, course and section data to roster those students into Google Classroom automatically using the data you're already sending to us. There would be no additional work. And then we would take the data that is submitted, the grade data and the assignment data that's submitted by students and teachers in Google Classroom, and take that back out of Google Classroom and give that back to your student information system. So there's no need for dual entry, redoing everything over and over again. It's just automatically in there. Right now we're in contract negotiations with the vendor that was providing the connector tool. Google or G Suite and Google are free for all if you choose to do that. And this is like I said earlier, this is an opt-in service, and we will absolutely be working with a few pilots to get all the bugs worked out. One from each vendor is our goal, and then once we get all the bugs worked out, we'll open it up to anybody who wants to opt in. Thank you, Superintendent.
Okay, first, anybody have questions to direct to Eric before we stop that or shift the conversation? Thank you very much, Eric. We know this is something that will save your teachers a lot of time, and we hope that that's something that those of you familiar with this process will appreciate, and we hope it's a valuable service. This would be something we would upfront the costs and do to hopefully benefit districts if that's of value. All right. Well, I tell you what, let's go ahead and open up for any questions that you, oh wait, we do have a question. It says, do you need districts to volunteer still to pilot? Eric?
Right now, we're not at that phase yet. We already have a couple, one for Power School and one for Tyler Tech. When we get together to discuss, who would be the best schools, it would be awesome if you guys would, if you're willing to pilot, just email me. I'll put my email in the chat, and we will absolutely consider you.
All right, that sounds good. Thank you. All right, very good. Well, let's, I think there's a few questions in the chat, so let's see if we can have a few of those come forward, and maybe then we'll answer that. Aaron Espolt would be able also to share a little bit, I think.
Hi, Superintendent, this is Carolyn. Can you hear me?
I can, thanks.
Great, very good. Yes, we've had a number of questions about exact path, and Aaron is probably seeing those in the chat and maybe is able to respond to some of those. One of the questions is about, is exact path an all-in-one online curriculum? Can that be the only thing that is used, or do there need to be other things added on to ExactPath? Could you respond to that?
Well, very good. So it is a part of, and in an emergency, certainly I know New York City, for example, when they went to distance learning, they worked to give ExactPath to 1.7 million students in like over a 48-hour period. And they moved to that to finish the school year. That it has much more that it can offer, but I will let Aaron jump in.
Thank you, Superintendent. I think you answered that pretty well. It can be used for reading and for English and math as a supplement in case of an emergency to transition seamlessly in and out of instruction. However, it is not an all-inclusive CMS, as some of you may be used to. For that full curriculum, it is meant to supplement and help identify those gaps and remediate some of those learning gaps with individualized instruction. So it is a learning path that's created. However, we encourage you to utilize that in conjunction with your ongoing instruction from your traditional settings.
And Aaron, would you speak to how it aligns with our standards?
There has been a crosswalk study done that we will have ready when we're able to roll this out to school districts. That has been done with the Oklahoma academic standards. And so there is that study available for districts to reference.
Okay. But it is going to be a tool that we know is going to be very important. Those states that have used it for longer periods are able to use it in additional ways because of the diagnostic component. But again, this will blend with those tools that many of our districts are already using with NWEA maps for placement and for charting that, that growth path for a student, as well as Renaissance STAR assessments. So that was part of why we were interested in choosing this. We also know that another, probably half of the state is either with Edmentum or with Edgenuity. And Edgenuity doesn't have anything like it yet. They said they're about 1.5 to 2 years away. So just to give you that little bit of a background there, but the ability for students to log on and begin could start now, and we can start working to close those gaps with students that are enrolled in a district that opts in. And we just encourage you to explore that. Again, ExactPath will be contacting districts, I know, as well. We are leaving this to more of, in order to provide you with the greatest amount of flexibility to tailor how you want to determine your settings at a district level. And then there are 47 districts that are ready and have been using ExactPath. We did not want them to lose all their historical growth data on their students. So we are not setting that at the state level. We're allowing every district to make these determinations on their own. There is a default setting to next year's grade level. And if you do not use one of these other tools, or you don't want to set it classroom by classroom or in a school a certain way, it can be, and that's actually what, for instance, New York City did. They set everyone we want them to be at grade level by the end of the year, and it starts wherever they are, even if it's 2 years behind, based on adaptive questions and how they are answered. And then it begins the work of mastering skills standard by standard to close those gaps. I hope that helps.
Superintendent, we have a number of questions on ExactPath, and so we might just stay on that topic for a little bit longer. There was a question about districts being able to do a test account for ExactPath to kind of check it out before they fully sign on. Is that possible?
I will let Aaron explain that. I think he's been involved in exploring that himself.
Yes, we're working for that option. We can't guarantee that that's going to be a possibility yet, as we kind of close out the contract negotiations. Brad may be able to speak to that just a little bit better. I would like to answer the other question that's in the chat box about training. As Superintendent mentioned, this training will be at the LEA level, the local level, and you do not, as a school district, at this time have to do anything to sign up for that. That will be sent to you. So please do not contact SD at this time to sign up for ExactPath. The onboarding and the rollout will all be finished up hopefully in the next few weeks, and we'll get that information to you. And as that information comes to you, that professional development will be at the local level as well. And SDE will be going through some of that as well so that we can better answer and facilitate any of your questions and your needs at the local level.
But you certainly will have, and you should have, the ability to get in and look things over. I mean, just even looking at their website, there's a lot of information. Edmentum's been around for, I guess, 60 years. It's a long history in this particular space. So I think there's plenty there to glean, but we do want you to have the opportunity to learn as much as you want before you consider this free tool. Aaron, I know you mentioned personally that you had some ideas, and then after you got involved with it and got into it, you actually made a personal plea to your own home district.
That's correct, Superintendent. And so as many of you on this call have children of your own, coming from the school leader seat that I sat in previous to this position, we're always a little bit skeptical of new things coming out, and as an addition to another thing that we would be involved in. And so I was a little skeptical as it was being presented to us here at SDE, but after being involved in it and looking at it, and I did have the opportunity to go into the program, I really became a fan of it and reached out to my home district to ensure that we would be able to utilize it in my home district for my own child, because I want the ability for my child to be on it this summer and try to catch up on some of those gaps that we all know will exist. And so as I have been able to review it and get into it, my own children will be utilizing it, and I'm proud to say that my home district will be utilizing it to give that advantage. So I'm grateful that this opportunity will be there. It's not an infomercial. I'm not trying to sell anybody on it, but I am excited about it and excited for you to get it in your hands. And we're working very hard at SDE here to be able to get that to you as quickly as we possibly can.
And again, there's no cost to districts. So if that can, I think I see several questions about costs. That's been, we are bearing the costs 100% for the 13-month contract.
And so, Superintendent, to clarify, this will be available for just this coming school year for free. Is that right?
Right. And let's see, let's get the feedback from you when that's over.
There was a question.
Grade level is K through 12.
There was a question about whether ExactPath has an assessment tool to meet the RSA requirements. Could you speak to that?
No, it cannot be used for RSA. And that is because it's not approved by the state board. It hasn't gone through the required 5 domains being included as part of the rigorous screening that was done by the state board through the independent researchers with REL Southwest. And that would be something any vendor is open to requesting, but this is not something that can be used at this time.
Okay, and then maybe lastly on this topic before we move on, just want to note that Kyle Reynolds, superintendent from Woodward, noted that they called Edmentum and set up a Zoom demo, and that other options could certainly do the same if they're interested and want more information at this time.
Yes, very good idea. And again, there are 47 districts that already use ExactPath, so they have been doing this on their own, and we'll be alleviating that required, purchase or renewal. And but those are some folks that if you'd like to speak with them, those who are familiar are pretty excited about this.
Okay, Superintendent, we've had a couple of questions about virtual learning plans for this fall. Can a student be full-time virtual learning from home if the student or their parent is uncomfortable sending that child to school?
That's a really important question because it's a very likely scenario. And the answer is yes, but you have to have a policy on how you will help that student work within that type of learning environment and what your local district rules will be around attendance and what that means. So I'm going to let Brad Clark just speak a little bit to this, just to cover some of the important elements that need to be considered.
Yeah, Superintendent, I think you answered it on point exactly as I would actually. The questions that we seem to be receiving, understandably so, surround attendance policies and the importance of having those in place when those virtual days are going to be utilized, whether it's an individual student who will be utilizing the virtual instruction. How are we going to measure attendance? We do have in both the return to learn document as well as FAQs, those bullet points that are the essential considerations, if you will, prior to unveiling your virtual program within the school district. But attendance policies, devices, access, connectivity, those are the other considerations. I would mention that attendance is not just speaking about student attendance, but very likely school personnel attendance and requirements, whether it be logins, communication, regular communication, how often that has to be, those kinds of things should be taken into consideration. But again, those are in the return to learn document and the FAQs. Just very briefly, if I might, on Exact Path, we are, as you said, finalizing that contract. As a part of that, we're not just working with their legal team, but their sales team as well. And so if we could just ask for a day so that we can focus on finalizing that contract and not pull them away for demos and things like that. They've actually inquired about that as well.
Okay, very good. Sure.
Okay, continuing on with questions about virtual learning, how is a student to be counted absent or present if they are doing virtual learning during the coming school year?
And
Sure.
I'm going to give that back to Brad. Go ahead, but I'll follow up with after you speak, Brad.
Sure. So for attendance purposes, good news, districts have local flexibilities here of how they will measure attendance for virtual instruction. One option, and it is just that as an option, could be the requirements that apply to the statewide virtual schools. And that primarily looks at number of instructional activities completed within a minimum time period. I believe the amendments to the virtual charter school requirements look at 72 instructional activities, but districts have the ability to go and look at that maybe daily or weekly and so forth. So they have the flexibility there with respect to absences, thinking about medical absences and things like that. Again, that's going to be the answer of a local decision, local control there.
So I just want to also bring to your attention that we're hearing from districts that are really doing some innovative things and structurally some really sound planning. And I want to highlight those from time to time as we come across those as districts share that information with us. I don't want everyone to email Sherry Durkee at this moment and overwhelm her, but some really great ideas coming from Sand Springs. And one of the takeaways I am wanting to highlight is how Sherry's team is working to define the different types of learning opportunities within their district. What does it mean to be virtual, full-time, or a hybrid of a blended model? They're going to define those, and then they will have a more clear understanding from students and families and the school, where there's a way to also move in and out of those different defined instructional methods, but it still gives that flexibility that people will have a better idea of what is meant by different terms. I think that's smart. And I think Sherry, I mean, yeah, I don't want to say this if she's not willing, but I always know that y'all are very generous when you do have these things finalized and are usually willing to share those. So just a little advanced announcement of take a look at what they're doing in Sand Springs.
And Superintendent, do you know if anyone might be providing sample policies that boards can consider or model their virtual attendance days after?
I do know that our membership organizations have a lot of resources. So I would turn you to those organizations. Then I would also say that, yes, as we find those samples of things we think are great, we want to highlight those as well and encourage you, of course, to consult with legal and with those that are working in this and guiding others as with those membership organizations. We may have some samples. I don't know the answer to that. I would have to ask Aaron if that's something we would be working on.
Yes, Superintendent, I just put in the chat box that on our OK Edge learning platform, there is a learning module that has been put up that allows for not only discussion and questions. If you have some of those questions, this is a place that you can post those, and it's a networking capability for districts to share their best practices as well as some of those policies that you were speaking to. So I have put that in the chat box to steer anyone with those questions, but also would like to find out more about the distance learning days to go to our OK Edge learning platform.
And I would just like to underscore again, this is really a paradigm shift for most everyone in public education. But I do think we have a real opportunity to shed some of the way we have thought about attendance and shift more to outcomes and more competency-based ways of considering mastery, or if students are learning and growing, and how we need to maybe adjust those current attendance policies to make room for different needs. And I want you to feel that freedom, to feel the ability to truly differentiate with and respond to what you believe your community is going to need. And COVID is going to be the perfect opportunity to do that, because we know not everyone is going to be comfortable walking back into school, or maybe they are until there's a first report of a student who has it, or a teacher, and helping in advance to assure them that there's a plan for shifting and moving into appropriate models of instructional delivery, and that we've planned ahead for that. These are the kinds of things that I think can be positive and outlast a response to a pandemic, and actually provide greater opportunities for the families that we serve.
Okay, Superintendent, maybe we can transition to some questions about social distancing. We had an interesting comment / question kind of at the top of our, just put in the chat at the top of the webinar. The question, I want to read it exactly. When social distancing is required, we hope to use every available space to split classes in half. The teacher would teach half while the other half did online or distance learning under the supervision of an aide. And then the groups would switch approximately halfway through the day, so that each group would get about the same amount of direct instructional time with the teacher and the same amount of online or distance learning under the supervision of an aide. Do we believe that that is an acceptable plan for working with students for social distancing? And I think Brad may also have some input on that after your comments, Superintendent.
Well, my initial reaction is yes, I think that that works, but I'm going to defer to Brad.
I agree. I think that does work. And from our standpoint, we look at it as the teacher of record, and who will that be? So keeping that in mind, I do think it's allowable. The only exceptions that I might look to was with respect to special education and some of the limitations that exist in federal law there. But generally speaking, I think that is an allowable approach.
Someone else I know mentioned the request for whether or not it was advisable to have built-in distance learning days. And I think that's actually a smart idea, especially if you are wanting to integrate this. It's always a good idea to find ways to embed these kinds of new types of delivery so that when we do need to shift potentially in a community to 2 weeks of distance learning, for example, for either a family or for an entire hall in a school or the whole school or district, it won't be something that's unfamiliar.
Superintendent, we had a question about connectivity, and a district expressed that they got feedback from their auditor that it would not be allowed to pay for connectivity in the student's home. Do we know anything about that issue, or is there anything that SDE can do to help assist with that situation?
And I guess I would question who that auditor is that, I'm sorry?
I said, I think the key is the connectivity in the student's home. So perhaps hard wiring might be what is being referred to. Could the school pay for that hard wiring? And I don't know if there's anybody else on our team that could maybe speak to that concern.
I'm happy to try to answer it as best as I can. I appreciate this being raised, not something that I'd heard about previously, but I think raising this gives us an opportunity to work with the auditor's office and those individual audit firms that are on the approved list. I believe it is allowable, but it might get into specifics about how that's done, what is being provided, and something there. But again, appreciate that being raised and something that we can work towards with the auditor's office. I will say, sorry, just to follow up on a thought on that. If it's going to be required for attendance, you've got to make sure that the individual student has access through an adequate connection, or that equitable resources are provided in advance. And by that, I mean, an example could be packets. But if it's going to be required for part of a free education, you have to make sure that that connection is there, or some other equitable mechanism.
Also, I thank you for that point, Brad, but also thinking about the comment from this auditor, it's very hard for me to believe that that would be aligned with the whole purpose of our COVID funds, which are, hotspots are going in homes. So whether it's wired or not, it probably would depend potentially on what is allowable already for those who already qualify because of low socioeconomic status, for some of those kinds of opportunities through Cox, communication and cable, etc. So let's really explore that before and work with these auditors that are giving that advice. It may just be a lag in some of the guidance for auditors.
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, the Treasury regulations that were released March 20th specifically allow just what you said, these connections to be in the homes and things of that nature. They're approved reimbursements. And so I tend to think there's a lag there, but I've got it down. We'll look into it.
Very good.
Okay, Superintendent, could you speak to regarding screening of students? Is it suggested that districts keep documentation or a record of student temperatures? And I think we've also had the discussion about doctor's notes and returning to school requiring a doctor's note, excuse me. Would you have any advice to provide on that sort of documentation being required?
So I'm just going to speak off the cuff here, and and those on my team can clean this up if they don't like my answer and I've veered off here. But no, I do not want us to create situations as a state requirement that you have to keep certain documentation. But what I would say is do what makes sense. If you are, well, we are not going to create hurdles and barriers for kids to come to school, or for their documentation to be stored and audited by RAOs or something along those lines. So let's just use common sense and really work toward a culture of thinking of others and how our actions impact those around us when we go to school. That culture is what is going to keep us safer. Documenting, we're taking the word of people that in some communities we may be asking, parents, please screen your children. And they may not have had a fever when they left home, but they do in school. So I just would be very cautious about creating bureaucratic steps that don't need to be in place. Now, you guys may feel differently from a legal standpoint or from something else we've already shared.
No, I think what you said is right. A pragmatic and common sense approach to be reasonable and not create this huge system. I think that's the right approach, and I'll leave it there.
I just think we have some students who, in fact, I think we have some students that if we say you cannot come back without a doctor's note, we're putting a financial burden on that family to go back to a doctor. And that might be mitigated through just this simple duration of time that we ask them to stay out. But I would, this is kind of uncharted, and we're going to try to balance getting kids in school, giving them instruction, giving flexibility where possible, and keeping people safe. And all of that can be done, but we're going to need to be flexible and understanding and working to build that culture of thinking of others and the safety of others, not just what we want, and that mask is one safeguard that can protect others. But again, it's balancing. So I'm just going to continue to underscore the need to balance and do what is the CDC says feasible, practical, and acceptable in the local context.
Superintendent, just if I can add to that a little bit, if a district is going to require that, strongly encourage that to be communicated well in advance. And in fact, if we're talking about for school personnel, if a medical note is going to be required in order to return, that has to be made available through a policy handbook or some sort of information to the individual employee, and that's a requirement under FMLA. So advance notice is a key.
Okay.
Okay, Superintendent, I think that we've answered most all the questions either in the chat or directly from you and the team. So we're almost at our time, but we might pause for any last question to pop up. And any additional or final comments from you, Superintendent, in the meantime?
No, I just really applaud the work that you are doing. This is such an unusual time, and we are seeing extraordinary leadership, and really it's inspiring. So I thank you for tackling these issues and for giving a sense of confidence that comes with, having those plans being developed with stakeholder input, including teachers. I do think teachers need their voice to be part of these plans, and I would underscore how important it is to include an array of stakeholders so that there can be more voices explaining how decisions were made and developed and improved because of their participation. So I know you guys are all pros at that, but I think it goes a long way with the way things will go as we enter the new school year.
Okay, we had a few here jump in under the wire. Where can districts find out more about the incentive grants?
All right. Well, we expect you to have all of that information either tomorrow or Friday. And Carolyn, would you have anything else to add?
No, that's exactly right. We expect to release the application, and there will likely be a news release and additional information that will be on our website in the next day or two on the incentive grant. And then similarly, any idea about information for the free hotspots and how districts can access those?
That'll be a separate application. Carolyn, you want to speak to that?
Yes, that's exactly right. So we're a little bit further behind on this one, so it may still yet be a week or two probably before we're able to have information on the hotspots. And I'm sure I just gave Brad a heart attack saying a week or two, but we are still working to negotiate that contract. So that's still a little bit down the road, but we wanted to make sure that you all knew everything that we were working on. And then lastly here, I think Jennifer Weber wanted to mention one last item on CEP.
Okay, let's.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you for that. I did want to mention, because I think we mentioned on last week's call that we were going to do one final data pull for CEP in June. And that is going to be done. They are going to give it to us on June 25th, barring no complications with that process. It would be available to you all on June 26th. If there's a complication, it would be available on Monday, June 29th. That is so that you can have the most up-to-date SNAP direct cert data from the system so that you can look at CEP for next year potentially.
Excellent. Thank you all. And then finally, I do see some questions about Imagine Math we did not talk about. And that is in next year's appropriated budget. So starting July 1, we'll be able to access that. And we are, those who are interested in that, we want you to be able to get that going as fast as possible. That's another contract that has to be done. So we're putting these in order and trying to get them out just as rapidly as possible. I'm telling you, the teams here at the department, they are just working around the clock and through the weekends to try to get these things ready for you just as fast as possible. So please know we're trying to get them to you just as soon as we can. I know that at some point, there might be a little let up where everyone takes a deep breath, but boy, it's not happening anytime soon. And just as you're really working hard in your communities to roll out your plans, and a lot of that is dependent on the information that we're able to provide you, just know we're working as fast as we can, but we want to also get you the most competitive opportunity out there. And we're also working with other agencies and with the governor's office as well. So we think that there's some good things coming, and we are going to continue to fight for you, for our kids and families. And I just, again, appreciate all of the help and support that you're providing your communities. And let's look at this next year as not just a response to COVID and reopening school, but an opportunity to do things a little differently and meet our kids in perhaps new ways than what we had done before. Again, I think this can be a pull start for something really innovative and new, but at the same time, now is the time to keep our focus on the learning and the growth that has to happen so that our kids can fill those weak areas with secured, mastered skills. And that is what we're going to keep our focus on as we think about a priority of what we move forward and bring to you: connectivity, opportunities to close gaps in learning, and for as many as possible, a lot of different flexibility and choices to get great education within your districts. So I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much. And we will answer anything that you leave here in the box. I would say most things that haven't been answered in our conversation are already available either through the FAQs or in the Return to Learn framework. So take care. Have a great rest of the week and weekend, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.